disease, it's a challenge because the population's so small. And the good news is that the FDA is the one who monitors the clinical trials. They're the ones who are going to give it FDA approval so that it can be a drug out on the market. And you need FDA approval for insurance to pay for it, and so that's why it's really important, or these drugs would be way too expensive for people to use. But the FDA is a little more relaxed with rare diseases because the populations are so small, and in cases like Batten disease where they're terminal, they realize that parents have a little more leeway with what they're willing to try if the alternative is death. So think about a scientist who's really into the science and they love doing the experiment and they, I've done something. Okay, I'm going to go on to this experiment and this new hypothesis. Those academic institutions, they don't have the resources, they don't have the extra funds to take it to the next step, and I mean, that's really not what their infrastructure is, drug development. It used to be, drug development is really a commercial business, and so pharmaceutical companies are the ones who are going to invest the kind of money that needs to be invested because they're going to get the return on it. We're an academic institution, they might get some intellectual property rights, but they're not going to go and develop the drugs and actually make the money on it. But I think the other problem is that funders, so this is an interesting statistic, in the United States there are 225,000 medical research funding organizations, and that's a lot. But only 90% of them ever make it, raise $1 million or more. And so you can imagine if we're looking at, $1 billion industry, if you're just going to throw $1 million at one problem, you're probably not going to get much accomplished. So I think that's a big part of the problem. And think of how many different fundraising groups there are for even diseases like cancer, or different diseases. Many people set up foundations and they're not really all getting together and saying, let's have one strategy and all pool our money together and do it on the same thing, which is one of the things we're trying to do. And I think it's been more successful because you can raise a lot more money and target it a lot better if you're working with multiple groups who are raising money. So those things that are published in medical journals, that's news, and that's something that could be taken and used in other experiments or in other diseases or to create drugs. And so there's one of those every 30 seconds, and yet we have like 25 drugs a year that get developed. And so what they call that is the Valley of Death, which you saw, and what they're talking about is where those discoveries just sort of fall and nothing ever gets done with them. So there could be a cure for something out there published in a little journal, that nobody ever picked up on or took a step further, and who knows. So the Valley of Death is probably, I think, the biggest challenge for a rare disease. One other challenge when we're talking about the Valley of Death and how things drop off is for so many rare diseases, like think about cancer, and there's still so much they don't know or understand about cancer. There's a lot they do, and they can build on that. But there's, in many rare diseases, there are plenty that they don't have a name. Nobody really, they haven't found enough people who have the same thing to sort of even put a structure to it. And then I think when at least it's established and it has a name, like Batten disease, for instance, the first person to write about Batten disease was like in the 1890s, so it's been around that long. And it was just like in the 1990s when they even figured out that it was a gene mutation and what it was. So, that's a long time to go, and, it's great. Technology ramps up and we can do so much more, but for us, the challenge is we still don't even know. We kind of can tell some of the things that are going wrong neurologically, but we don't know why. And so you can't really fix it until you know why, and you're not even sure what you can target exactly to try things to fix it. So I think for rare disease, really all disease, that's a big part of the problem. People want to, they want to cure in a hurry, but what they can't appreciate is we've still got so much studying to do, and no one wants to hear that answer, for sure. And I think there's a lot of information out there that just isn't being shared. And it might be just out of ignorance because you don't know that the information I have might benefit your disease. But it also is, you make money off the drugs, and so having the IP is a benefit, and I think the government could probably be involved that way a little more to give incentives for people to share information, which would be helpful. In a rare disease, it's, if you're coming out of graduate school and you're like, I want to study something, most people aren't going for a rare disease because it's sort of like, I don't know if there'll be funding, if this will be something long term I can do, and they, it would be probably more lucrative. I'm not sure it's ever very lucrative, but to go into, study cancer or study something that is, they know will be around, people will There is so much money spent on medical research, $100 billion a year. And out of that, people are making discoveries right and left. The statistic is that a discovery is published every 30 seconds. And when they say published, they mean that's a researcher in a lab does an experiment with a hypothesis that they think will affect a disease, and they find something. And so then they have to do the experiment several times to verify it, and then they publish it in a medical journal.